Madrid, Spain, January 1941. Juan Pucol Garcia stared at his reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror of his small Madrid apartment and wondered if he was insane. He probably was. Any sane person would have given up by now, would have accepted that a chicken farmer with no intelligence training, no connections, and no credentials had no business trying to become a spy. But one had never been particularly sane. Or perhaps he was the only sane person left in a world that had gone mad. He adjusted the tie he'd borrowed from his brother-in-law and practiced his most confident expression. Today would be his fourth attempt to convince the British to let him spy for them. The first three had ended with polite dismissals from minor embassy officials who clearly thought he was either crazy or a German plant. Maybe he was crazy, but he definitely wasn't working for the Germans. In fact, he hated the Germans. Or more precisely, he hated what they represented, the fascism that had torn Spain apart, the totalitarianism that was devouring Europe. One had lived through the Spanish Civil War, had seen what fascism did to ordinary people, and he was determined to fight it in whatever way he could. Even if that meant making a complete fool of himself at the British embassy. Juan. His wife Araceli appeared in the doorway, their infant daughter in her arms. You're really going through with this? I have to try. They've rejected you 3 times. Then maybe the 4th time will be different. He turned to face her, taking in her worried expression. Araceli was the practical one in their marriage, the one who kept track of money and made sure they didn't starve. She thought his spy ambitions were romantic nonsense. She was probably right, but he had to try anyway. What if the Germans find out you're approaching the British? She asked quietly. What if the Spanish police arrest you for it? Then I'll tell them the truth, that I'm trying to help end this war before it destroys everything. He kissed her forehead. Have faith, Araceli. Sometimes the most unlikely people change history. She didn't look convinced, but she let him go. The British embassy official who met Juan this time was different. Younger, sharper-eyed, with the bearing of someone who actually worked in intelligence rather than just shuffling papers. His name was Thompson, and he listened to Juan's pitch with an expression that gave nothing away. Let me understand this correctly, Senor Pucol, Thompson said in careful Spanish. You want us to send you to England, train you as an agent, and then deploy you to Germany as a British spy? Yes. And your qualifications are? I speak Spanish, English, and some German. I have no criminal record. I hate fascism. And I'm willing to die to stop Hitler. Thompson's expression didn't change. We have hundreds of people with better qualifications who want to be agents. People with military experience, university educations, existing intelligence contacts. Why should we choose a chicken farmer from Madrid? One had prepared for this question. He'd been preparing for it through 3 rejections. Because I'm nobody, he said simply. I have no connections to British intelligence, no obvious skills, no reason for anyone to suspect me. That makes me perfect. And because I'm desperate enough to prove myself that I'll do whatever it takes. Including getting yourself killed? If necessary. Thompson studied him for a long moment. Then he stood up. Thank you for coming in, Senor Pucol. We'll be in touch if anything develops. It was the same polite dismissal one had received 3 times before. He walked out of the embassy feeling the familiar weight of failure settling over his shoulders. But this time, he didn't go home. Instead, he walked to a different building in downtown Madrid, the German embassy. If the British wouldn't let him spy for them, he'd find another way to fight. A more dangerous way. A completely insane way. He was going to become a German spy. And then he was going to betray them. The German intelligence officer who interviewed one was named Klaus Fischer, and he was much more receptive than the British had been. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, was always looking for Spanish agents to work in Britain. Spain was neutral, Spanish citizens could travel more easily, and many Spaniards harbored pro-fascist sympathies after Franco's victory. One played the part perfectly. He claimed to be a passionate fascist, expressed admiration for Hitler, and talked about wanting revenge against the British for supporting the Republicans during the Spanish Civil War. He lied through his teeth with such conviction that Fischer seemed genuinely impressed. Your enthusiasm is admirable, Herr Pucol, Fischer said. But enthusiasm alone doesn't make a good agent. What can you offer us? Access, Juan replied. He'd been planning this conversation for weeks, crafting a legend that would be plausible but impressive. I have business contacts in England. Import-export. I can travel there with legitimate cover, establish myself, and begin sending intelligence. What kind of intelligence? Whatever you need. Troop movements, naval activities, industrial production. I have friends in the British diplomatic service, a complete lie, who might be persuaded to share information after a few drinks. Fisher leaned back, studying Juan carefully. And why should we trust you? Because I hate the British, Juan said with perfect sincerity. It was easy to sound convincing when you were lying about your lies. They armed the communists who destroyed my country. I want to see England suffer the way Spain suffered. Something in Fisher's expression shifted, a slight relaxation, a hint of satisfaction. He believed it. Or at least, he wanted to believe it enough that Juan's obvious sincerity tipped the scales. Very well, Herr Pucol. We'll give you a chance. Fisher pulled out a form. You'll need training in codes, wireless operation, invisible ink. When can you start? Immediately. The training was perfunctory. The Germans were clearly rushing him through because they needed agents in Britain. They taught him basic codes, gave him instructions for writing invisible ink messages using invisible ink, developed by invisible ink by simply using milk or lemon juice as invisible ink, provided him with a cover story, and assigned him a handler codenamed Colenthal. Juan absorbed everything, memorized everything, and then went home to tell Araceli what he'd done. She stared at him in horror. You did what? I became a German spy. Juan, they'll kill you when they find out. Only if they find out. Which they won't. Because I'm going to do this perfectly. He took her hands. Listen to me. The British wouldn't give me a chance. So I'm creating my own chance. I'll go to England on German money, and I'll immediately turn myself into British intelligence. I'll work as a double agent. The Germans will think I'm spying for them, but I'll really be working for the British. That's insane. Yes. But it might work. It took him 3 days to convince her. In the end, what persuaded her wasn't his arguments but his determination. She recognized that he was going to do this with or without her support, so she might as well help him survive it. Promise me you'll be careful, she said finally. I promise. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. I promise. Promise me you'll come home. That one was harder. Because they both knew it might be a promise he couldn't keep. I'll do everything I can, he said. It would have to be enough. Lisbon, Portugal, July 1941. Juan never made it to England. He couldn't get a British visa. The Germans had given him money for the journey but no actual way to enter the country. So he did something either brilliant or insane, depending on your perspective. He decided to fake it. From Lisbon, using a city guidebook and an old map of Britain, Juan began sending reports to his German handlers about his activities in England. He invented details from his imagination, pulled information from British newspapers and magazines available in Lisbon, and crafted a fictional existence as a German spy in London. His first reports were cautious, observations about British morale, descriptions of rationing, comments on bomb damage. Nothing too specific, nothing that could be easily verified. The Germans ate it up. Emboldened, Juan got more creative. He invented an entire network of fictional subagents. A British pilot who drank too much, a Portuguese businessman with access to shipping information, a Venezuelan student sympathetic to fascism. All of them existed only in his imagination, but he wrote about them with such detail that they seemed real. The Germans sent him more money to pay his fictional agents. Juan used it to support his family and expand his fictional network even further. It was the most successful con in intelligence history, and it was being run by a chicken farmer from his apartment in Lisbon. But Juan knew it couldn't last. Eventually, the Germans would want intelligence so specific that he couldn't fake it. Eventually, they'd send someone to verify his reports. Eventually, they'd discover the truth. He needed to bring the British in. He needed their protection and their resources. Most importantly, he needed them to believe him. So he wrote them a letter. Not to the embassy this time, he'd learned that lesson. Instead, he carefully crafted a message and sent it through a contact to someone he hoped had actual intelligence connections. In the letter, he explained everything: the German training, the fictional network, the reports he'd been sending from Lisbon. He offered to work for Britain as a double agent, feeding false information to the Germans while gathering real intelligence for the Allies. Then he waited. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. One began to think the letter had been lost or dismissed as another crazy volunteer's fantasy. Then a man knocked on his door at 2 in the morning. "Senor Pucol, I presume?" The man was British, middle-aged, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "My name is Harris. I work for an organization interested in your entrepreneurial activities." Juan knew immediately that his life was about to change. The British had finally found him. Or more accurately, he'd finally convinced them he was worth finding. "Come in," he said. "We should talk." They talked for 6 hours. Harris asked questions, hundreds of questions, about Juan's background, his German training, his fictitious network, his reports. Juan answered everything honestly, holding nothing back. If he was going to convince the British to trust him, he needed to be completely transparent. "Let me understand this," Harris said around 4 in the morning, rubbing his temples. "You've been sending the Germans intelligence reports about Britain while living in Lisbon, using nothing but guidebooks and newspapers?" "Yes." "And they believe you?" "Completely. They've sent me over £20,000 to pay my agents and cover my expenses." Harris started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that suggested he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "That's either the most brilliant or the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Can it be both?" "Apparently." Harris composed himself. "Here's the situation, Senor Pucol. You're either exactly what you claim, an amateur who stumbled into the greatest deception of the war, or you're a German plant trying to infiltrate British intelligence with an unbelievably audacious cover story. How do I prove which one?" "You don't." "I do." Harris pulled out a notebook. "I'm going to verify every detail of your story. Every report you sent, every fictional agent, every pound the Germans gave you. If you're lying about anything at all, I'll have you arrested as a German spy." "Understood." "Understood. But if you're telling the truth?" Harris smiled for the first time. "If you're really just a mad Spanish chicken farmer who accidentally created a fictional spy network that the Germans believe, then you might be the most valuable intelligence asset we have." London, England, April 1942. The British codenamed him Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, because he was the best actor in the world. They brought him to London, set him up with a handler named Tomas Harris, no relation to the man who'd interviewed him, and began the most elaborate intelligence deception in history. Juan's fictional network became real, or at least really fictional. The British helped him expand his imaginary agents, giving them detailed backgrounds, realistic behaviors, and plausible intelligence to report. What had started as Juan's solo improvisation became a massive MI5 operation involving dozens of intelligence officers. At its peak, Agent Garbo controlled a network of 27 fictional agents, all feeding information to the Germans through Juan's reports. The Germans trusted him completely, considered him one of their most valuable assets, and acted on his intelligence, which meant the British could manipulate German strategic decisions by controlling what Garbo told them. It was perfect, and it was about to become crucial. London, December 1943. Tomas Harris spread out maps across the table in the safe house where Garbo worked. "We need to talk about Overlord," he said quietly. "Overlord. The invasion of France. Today." Everyone knew it was coming, including the Germans. The question wasn't whether the Allies would invade, but where and when. And the British wanted the Germans to get that answer wrong. "We're going to use you," Harris continued. "Your network is going to convince the Germans that the invasion will hit Pas-de-Calais, the obvious target, instead of Normandy, where it will actually land." One felt his stomach tighten. "They'll verify. They'll watch the coast. When the invasion hits Normandy, they'll know I was wrong." "No." Harris smiled grimly. "Because you're going to tell them the invasion is hitting Normandy." "What?" "Listen carefully. This is complex." Harris pointed to the map. On D-Day morning, you're going to send an urgent message warning that the invasion is hitting Normandy. You'll send it with enough detail that the Germans will believe you've discovered it. But that will reveal the actual landing site. Yes. But you'll send the message at 3 in the morning, when your usual German handler is asleep. By the time he wakes up and reads it, the invasion will already be underway. Too late for the Germans to react, but early enough that they'll believe you tried to warn them. One began to understand. So they'll still trust me. Exactly. You tried to warn them, but your message arrived too late through no fault of your own. Your credibility remains intact. Harris leaned forward. And then, after the Normandy landing, you're going to convince them that Normandy was just a feint. That the real invasion, the main force, is still coming at Pas-de-Calais. The audacity of it took Juan's breath away. You want me to convince them to keep their best divisions away from Normandy by making them think it's a diversion? Not just keep them away. Keep them waiting for an invasion that will never come. If we can do that, if we can keep German reserves pinned at Pas-de-Calais for even a few weeks, the Normandy landings will have time to consolidate. We'll establish a beachhead they can't dislodge. And if they don't believe me? Then hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers die on the beaches. Harris's expression was grim. No pressure, Garbo, but you're literally one of the most important weapons we have for D-Day. You and your fictional agents are going to save more lives than any division of soldiers. June 5, 1944, 11 p.m. Juan sat at his wireless set, hands trembling slightly as he prepared to send the most important message of his life. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, the largest invasion force in history was preparing to cross the English Channel. And he was about to fake warn the Germans about it. The message was carefully crafted, full of urgent detail about troop movements, landing craft assembling, and preparations that suggested an imminent invasion of Normandy. It was accurate enough to be believable but sent just late enough to be useless. He began transmitting at 3 a.m. precisely. On the other end, his German handler Kulenthal was asleep. The message would be received and logged, but not read or forwarded until morning, by which time it would be too late. One finished transmitting and sat back, exhausted. Tomas Harris, who'd been watching silently, put a hand on his shoulder. "Well done, Garbo. I just condemned men to die on those beaches," one said quietly. "The Germans will read my message and know the invasion is coming, but they won't be able to stop it. Men will still die. Fewer men than if they'd been waiting with full preparations," Harris said. "And you're about to save thousands more with what comes next." June 9, 1944. 3 days after D-Day, with Allied forces struggling to expand their beachhead against fierce German resistance, one sent another message. This one was longer, more detailed, and more urgent. He reported that his agents had discovered evidence of a massive force, 40 divisions, still waiting in southeast England. This force, he claimed, was the real invasion army. Normandy had been a diversion to draw German reserves away from the true target, Pas-de-Calais. It was completely false. There were no 40 divisions waiting in England. But Juan's fictional agents confirmed the intelligence with such detail that it seemed irrefutable. Fabricated observations of tank divisions, real unit designations of American forces that actually existed, but were nowhere near England, shipping movements that seemed to presage a second invasion. The Germans believed every word. Hitler himself read Garbo's reports and ordered German reserves to stay at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for the real invasion that would never come. Entire armored divisions that could have been used to throw the Allies back into the sea instead sat idle, waiting for phantom armies to appear at the wrong beach. They waited for 7 weeks. By the time Hitler finally admitted there would be no second invasion, the Normandy beachhead was unbreakable. The Allies had won. And it was all because of lies crafted by a Spanish chicken farmer and his fictional spy network. London, July 1944. "The Germans want to give you the Iron Cross," Tomas Harris said, trying not to laugh. One looked up from his breakfast in disbelief. "What?" Hitler himself approved it. "You're being awarded the Iron Cross, second class, for your invaluable intelligence work. Kulenthal sent a message saying you're one of the Reich's most important agents." One started laughing. the slightly hysterical laughter of a man who couldn't quite believe his own life. They're giving me a medal for lying to them? And we're giving you an MBE member of the most excellent order of the British Empire for the same lies. Harris grinned. Congratulations, Garbo. You're probably the only person in history to receive military honors from both sides of the same war. Can I ever tell people about this? Not for 30 years. This operation stays classified until long after the war ends. As far as the world knows, Agent Garbo doesn't exist. So I saved thousands of lives, changed the course of history, and nobody will ever know? Welcome to the intelligence service, Harris said dryly. We do our best work in the shadows. Aftermath, 1945. When the war ended, Juan Pucol Garcia did something unusual for a successful intelligence agent. He disappeared. He faked his own death, pretending to die of malaria in Angola, and moved to Venezuela with his family. For 30 years, he lived quietly, running a bookshop in Caracas, never telling anyone about his wartime work. The Germans never learned the truth. Kulenthal, Juan's German handler, was so convinced of Garbo's reliability that after the war, during his denazification trial, he cited Garbo's intelligence as evidence that he'd been a competent officer who'd been deceived by circumstances beyond his control. He never knew that Garbo himself was the deception. The British kept the secret too. The Garbo files remained classified, and Juan's work was known only to a handful of intelligence officers who understood what he'd accomplished. Then, in 1984, a researcher discovered the truth. The files were finally declassified, and the world learned about Agent Garbo, the chicken farmer who became history's greatest spy. One was tracked down in Venezuela, now an old man running a bookshop. When asked about his wartime work, he was characteristically modest. I just wanted to do something to stop the madness, he said. I had no training, no experience, no credentials. Just determination and a willingness to lie very, very convincingly. Do you think what you did made a difference? I know it did. Every German division that stayed at Pas-de-Calais waiting for my fictional invasion was a division that couldn't fight at Normandy. Every day they waited for armies that didn't exist was a day the Allies used to establish their beachhead. Yes, I made a difference. How does it feel to know you saved thousands of lives? One was quiet for a long moment. Heavy, he said finally. It feels heavy, because I also know that my lies sent men into battle, that people died because of intelligence I fabricated. The Germans believed me so completely that they made strategic decisions based on fiction. That's a responsibility I'll carry forever. Would you do it again? Without hesitation. Evil has to be opposed, even if you're just a chicken farmer with no business being a spy. Especially then. Because sometimes the most unlikely people are the ones who change history. The legacy. Juan Pucol Garcia died in 1988, having finally received public recognition for his wartime work. His obituaries called him the greatest double agent in history, the spy who saved D-Day, the chicken farmer who fooled Hitler. But the numbers tell the real story. 27 fictional agents in his network, none of whom ever existed. Over 300 messages sent to German intelligence, every one of them carefully crafted lies. 7 weeks that German reserves spent waiting at Pas-de-Calais for an invasion that never came. Thousands of Allied soldiers who survived D-Day because German reinforcements never arrived. All because one man decided that he had to do something, anything, to fight evil, even if it meant becoming something he'd never trained for, risking everything, and living a lie so convincing that both sides believed him. The British officer who recruited him said it best. Garbo was the greatest actor in the world. Not because he was performing, but because he made everyone else believe their part in his fiction. He created an entire world that existed only in reports and radio messages, and he convinced the German military to treat that world as reality. That's not just spycraft. That's art. And it was art that changed the world. In Normandy, there's a museum dedicated to D-Day. Among the exhibits of weapons, uniforms, and vehicles, there's a small section about intelligence operations. In that section, there's a brief mention of Agent Garbo and his role in Operation Fortitude, the deception that kept German reserves away from the beaches. There's no statue, no dramatic monument. Just a photograph of a middle-aged Spanish man with kind eyes and a slight smile, looking like someone's uncle or friendly neighbor. Nothing about him suggests he was capable of one of the greatest deceptions in military history, which was always his greatest asset. He looked like nobody special. He seemed like someone you'd overlook. And that's exactly what made him perfect. The chicken farmer who saved D-Day. The amateur who outsmarted professionals. The man who proved that courage and creativity matter more than credentials. Agent Garbo. Juan Pucol Garcia. The greatest spy who almost never was.